Xbox sales figures soar. 3D gaming is coming to your cell phone. And Cryo is no more. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Do-do-do-do-do. Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the video game and home computer industries of yesteryear. Today we'll be traveling back 20 years to September of 2002. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined by everybody's favorite co-host, Peter. Welcome back, Peter.
You've forgotten how to introduce me, man.
Oh, yes, you're right. I've created this new standard for everybody, and you're the OG. I can't do that. So
you can't do that to me. You
say hi, Peter.
Hi.
Exactly. There we go.
Yeah.
A joke whose origin is lost in time.
Yes.
Now, it's been a hot minute since you've been on the show. What has been keeping you away, my friend?
Work. Sadly, I have to say work. I moved up a couple of letters in the company pecking order, which is super nice, especially for my wallet. However, it's actually pretty bad for podcast recording purposes. So, yep, it's keeping me pretty busy. It's been long days and...
We've been missing you, but it's good that you're back because we got some really, really juicy things that are just perfect for you.
For me?
Only you could deliver these the way that they need to be delivered. So.
Well, this is true for everything, man.
Yeah, you keep telling yourself that. I'm the one who actually sees the numbers. I know which episodes get the most play. No, just kidding.
Well, mine. So,
yeah, and I apologize to everybody right from the get-go if either one of us sounds a little tired. You woke up at 5 o'clock this morning. I woke up at 5:30 this morning, and we both had very, very long days. I'm hoping my voice holds out after lecturing for 6 hours today.
6 hours?
Yeah. Budget cuts. I've got extra classes. So 3 days a week I'm lecturing for 6 hours straight, and my voice has started to feel the burn.
You're a full-time employee, aren't you?
I am a full-time employee of the university,
just leave
yes.
That there.
All I have to say is I'm going to be racking up these extra hours for a little bit, and a couple semesters from now there's just going to be this hole in the schedule or something when I get to catch up on these, or probably not, who knows. Whatever the case may be, I had to quit and give up on my D&D class this semester, so I'm very, very sad. Well. The plight of the government employee, which in these very trying times, and I know for a lot of people out there listening, these are very trying times here in 2022.
And you're bitching about not being able to play D&D at work.
Exactly. I have no right to be complaining whatsoever.
Dude, you have every right.
No, I don't. I don't.
Able to play D&D at work, man, that's harsh.
Yeah, no. Let's not go there right now. That is a dream that shall live again another day. Okay. But enough banter. We have a metric ton of stories today. And so let's get right into the meat of the episode. But first, we do have to give the usual announcements. So everybody, remember, give us those 5-star ratings so other people can find the podcast. Spread the word. Follow us on the social media. Subscribe. Subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you have any questions or comments, you can contact us at videogamenewsroomtimemachine@gmail.com. Link is in the show notes below. Or join our Patreon, where you can check out the video versions of our next segment, the 7 Minutes in Heaven, as well as get early access to a whole mess of interviews that are up there, including my 2-part interview with the son of Jack Tramiel, Leonard Tramiel, about his time at Commodore. Absolutely brilliant stuff. If you didn't already check it out right before this episode came out, there was also my interview with Don Greenbaum, who was the treasurer and before that the banker for Commodore. Super interesting about the functioning of that company back in the 80s, the acquisition of Amiga. All that stuff is covered. Good stuff. And it's just $1 a month, so, even in trying times, I know every little bit helps, and yada, yada, yada. So, that being said, we've got that out of the way. Also, please remember, when we're talking about September of 2002 here, we're always using the cover dates of magazines and newspapers, so obviously the news happened at some point before that. We are aware of it. It's just a framing device, so we can slowly move through the rough chronology of the history of the industry. So please, no letters about that. And, as already said, our next segment is the 7 Minutes in Heaven, the segment where the co-host has to play one of the games that was reviewed in a publication dated September 2002. We had a ton of interesting titles on the list this month. GTA 3 for the PC, Duke Nukem Manhattan Project, Warcraft 3, Onimusha 2, Tekken 4...
And you picked the very specific German hell.
A very specific game that we've talked about in our previous time jump, because it just got reviewed in our 30-year jump, the original PC version of it. Now, 10 years later, we're getting a port to the Game Boy Advance of the game, and in 2022, the game has finally become legally advertisable and readily available in Germany.
Yeah, you can buy it on every corner.
And that game, of course, is Wolfenstein 3D, which you have not played before, correct?
Nope, never.
So this will be a fun experience for all. Are you ready, Peter?
I am so ready to shoot some Nazis.
Let's do it. Okay, and so here we're going to hit stop on everything. Welcome back from your 7 Minutes in Heaven, Peter. So, based on your brief time with Wolfenstein 3D on the Game Boy Advance, describe the game to our listeners.
Well, Wolfenstein is a first-person shooter where you walk through endless corridors, all looking more or less like the same, and you're shooting blue-eyed, yellow-haired Nazis. And every once in a while you walk into a room that just looks slightly different than the other corridors and has some swastikas and some pictures of Hitler and maybe some church valuables such as golden crosses and Holy Grail?
Yeah, there's a Holy Grail.
A couple of them, actually.
It comes up a lot.
So,
chalices. Let's call them chalices.
Right, chalices. English. Anyway, well, this is basically it, and I'm proud to say I've beaten the game. I've seen everything there is, from those soldiers to dogs, and I've played it on the highest difficulty level, and anyone who doesn't believe me, just give us a buck and see it for themselves.
Check out the video version where you got your ass handed to you as soon as you walk through the first door because you originally set it to the hardest difficulty level.
Cold-blooded. Yeah.
And then you pussied out and went with the lowest difficulty level to get a little bit further in the game.
I didn't pussy out. I want to show what's in there.
Yeah. And you never figured out that the L and R buttons would strafe. Which would have made movement around corners a lot less deadly.
Dude, I'm all for risk. You know? No risk, no fun. I went for the risk. I got my ass handed to me. I selected a slightly lower difficulty level, and all of a sudden there were no enemies anymore in the game, so the game somehow took pity on me.
Now, you had never played any iteration of Wolfenstein 3D before. What was the first FPS that you remember playing?
BioShock.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're coming at it at least a decade and a half too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I've never been a shooters guy, you know. I mean, oh no, wait. I might have played some weird version of Counter-Strike before in co-op with a friend of mine who was like, death from above, Peter, and he shot me. And then I was like, death from below, Peter, and then he shot me. I've never seen him. He just shot me all the time. So I was totally out.
Yeah. Okay, so basically, as soon as Duke Nukem 3D comes out, we're going to have to bring you back on for that wonderful experience.
Oh yeah, can't wait.
That's amazing. And you did play No One Lives Forever, but that was a 20-year jump game, not a 30-year jump game. So, like I said, coming into this, I chose this game not because it's a major milestone. I mean, this is one of these moments when they're porting 3D games to the Game Boy Advance. Everybody's trying to figure out just how far they can push this handheld's tech. The game doesn't get great reviews. Most people are just criticizing it because, like you said, the gameplay is very, very simple. Yeah. But it is a 10-year-old game. This was the OG FPS. It wasn't the very first one, obviously. There's Catacombs 3D before it, which was an EGA graphics, used a very similar game engine or the same game engine or an evolution of it. Mm-hmm. But this is the game that popularized it, and for the vast majority of people, Wolfenstein 3D is the first FPS game. It's the one that really gets out there. And at the time of this port, it's a 10-year-old design. So obviously, it's been superseded by games with much deeper, more complex gameplay, and the expectations are just different. The fact that it functions as well as it does on the Game Boy Advance is quite impressive, but I believe and then very next year, we're going to get Doom on the Game Boy Advance, and that's obviously a whole different level of complexity, gameplay, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but I mean, also it's 2002, and how long has the Game Boy Advance been on the market?
A little over a year at this point.
Yeah, so it's still pretty new tech.
It's still pretty new, and everybody's feeling it out. I mean, we've had a couple of real dogs on the Game Boy Advance at this point, games where people were trying to make stuff work, trying to make 3D engines happen that were just never meant to be, and we're going to get a lot more of those. Wait until we get to Flight of the Falcon. People are going to push this hardware well beyond what it should be doing. But at the end of the day, its popularity and the fact that it can sort of pull some of it off. Driver 3 on the Game Boy Advance, but we'll talk more about Driver 3 later in the show. So on and so forth. Okay. Would you recommend this game to anybody?
I'm sure there are people who would enjoy this game, and
that long
and now,
pause.
Dude, I have to be honest. I wouldn't recommend this crap for the heck of it. I mean, it's like, sorry. I mean, I see the historical value of it. However,
it doesn't hold up as a game.
No.
Nowadays.
Really. And I mean, I think all of those or a lot of those Game Boy Advance games, they didn't age well, if you know what I mean.
A lot of them did not, especially due to the low resolution and so forth. A lot of them did. And we will be playing a lot more GBA games for 7 Minutes in Heaven as we go through the next couple of years, just because there's a lot of real gems in there. But yeah, I agree with you. A lot of the stuff, especially the stuff that was trying to do technically impressive things, are interesting curios. Okay. But we're closing the book on that, and we have one more stop before we can turn on the time machine, and that is to check in with our good friend Ethan to find out what I got wrong in our August 2002 jump in a little section we call the Department of Corrections.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back to the Department of Corrections, Ethan. So, before you start laying into me for everything that I got wrong in August of 2002, it's time for...
the voter commento.
Yes, and it
voter,
is...
You are correct. Every game is a puzzle game because every game requires reasoning. It is correct.
Have you ever played a Sierra Adventure game? No, just kidding.
That is a demented puzzle. Yes, it is. But he is right. That is the determination is what video games are all about.
Okay.
All right, Carl. We are here. Signed, sealed, delivered. I'm yours. It's time for the Department of Corrections for August of 2002.
Okay. And so what did I get wrong? Nothing? Oh, perfect.
You're not going to step out that easy, big man. Come on, sit on down. Let's get nice and close.
Okay. This is going to be just like with the... Okay, yeah.
First of all, stop trying to take my job away. No reading Wikipedia articles while you're recording.
Okay.
Be wrong.
Be wrong. Okay. Job security.
It's fine. Next up, the numbers of the quote unquote 7th generation. I hate the generation thing, or 6th generation. But whatever, the GameCube, Xbox, PS2 era. GameCube actually did not beat the original Xbox. It's all things are estimates and whatnot, but by all estimates, GameCube sold 2.17 million versus Xbox sold 24 million.
Now, is that worldwide or just in North America?
I think that's worldwide. It's in general, PS2 sucked all the air out of everything because it sold 100 million. Yeah. It's ridiculous. So it wasn't like a super prosperous era across the board, but it was going up from the prior era.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I remember seeing those numbers at some point, but I couldn't tell if they were North American or international numbers. But yeah, North America, those are the accurate. It is accurate to say the Xbox still beat out the GameCube because, well, that controller. Oh, sorry, I couldn't help. I had to get the dig in. Keep moving.
Okay. This next one is a little bit contentious. I have said this many times, and people keep coming back on me over it. As far as I know, the pronunciation is Hiroshi Yamauchi. And the reason that I learned this is because there were some Japanese people who were visiting here. He's a Japanese collector and researcher. You can find him on Twitter, Onion Software, along with his boss at his work. They're very nice people, by the way. Very, very happy to meet them. I was talking to them, and they have some English skills, but I was talking about this book that had the head of Nintendo on it, and I said, Yamauchi-san, and they didn't get it. I pulled up a picture of it. I showed it to them. And they said, Yamauchi, and that's how I suddenly realize that, wow, it seems we may have been mispronouncing this whole time. It's a weird thing in the Japanese language. There are kind of like sometimes when there are two things next to each other, they get kind of combined. There's like a formal system of this. I'm not a linguist, so I'm not going to try to fully explain this. But the more I looked and I started listening a bit more closely, I think Yamauchi is correct. It may be a regional thing, but I believe Yamauchi is the correct general pronunciation of how you would say this name.
Okay. I mean, and this is where I'm probably going into waters I know nothing about. If you looked at the kanji, since each kanji is, I'm guessing, supposed to be a syllable or two, that might actually be able to clear that question up. It could just be a misconnection of vowels due to the way that it's being phonetically translated into Western type, as opposed to the breakdown of the kanji might actually give a more accurate read on where the syllables are supposed to be.
No, the Japanese doesn't really work like that.
Okay.
So it's a weird thing. Again, I'm not going to try to fully explain this, but basically, all there are regional dialects where things get pronounced slightly differently, but the Japanese system is an absolute system in the sense that the rules that apply in one place apply across the board, as opposed to through, do, and rough, as we have in English.
So there's no good translation of you say tomato, I say tomato, you say potato, I say potato.
Okay, let's move on before we get down into this. Next up, in your attempts to put down Nintendo, you called Final Fantasy XI ultra realistic. Really, Carl? It is very clearly stylized.
Well,
very
stylized.
The
anatomy, I mean, as far as anime characters are concerned, of course, because you still have the weird anime features, but it still has realistic proportions as opposed to Final Fantasy
I'm still
VII.
going against you on this. Their heads are pretty big. As one thing, but they are more true to life than something like Final Fantasy VII. That's the only concession I will give you.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going for. That I'm not saying that they're not anime characters, but at least the bodies have human-like proportions, which was a huge step up from Final Fantasy VII.
Your quote, ultra realistic. And you're wrong.
Okay.
Then, for a jump back into the past, the story you were telling about the digitized images in Journey is not right. You're misunderstanding the situation. So it's a thing by Ralph Baer. He's the one who created the digitized images that were used in Journey. The technology to digitize images, I should say.
Oh, really?
He headed up that technology. And the story he tells is that they were testing this idea. He was working with Bally to test this idea in an arcade on a type of game. I'm not sure if he describes fully what this game was, but they used it and you had the ability to put your face into it. I don't think it had anything to do with a high score. I think it was just you put your face in and then you play the game. And then the first day, everything turned out fine. And then the second day, someone pulled their pants down and he said that was the end of the thing. Only much later did Bally go back, decide to use the technology that had been created and specifically do for Journey to put their faces into the game.
Okay, cool. So that makes a lot more sense. And yeah, for some reason I thought that it was for the high score table, but I mean, given the fact that they actually used it on the sprites in Journey, that could have also been a possibility.
That was a possibility.
Yeah,
Bear said so. We're here. We're at the truth. I've given you the truth.
The weird thing is, later on in this episode, we're going to see an evolution of that technology 20 years later. We'll talk about that later. You don't know about it yet. You haven't heard it yet. It's coming.
I was there, Carl. I was there when the West fell. Fantasy's on the mind lately. It's one of those seasons of television. Everything is fantasy for a half second, and then everyone will go back to forgetting it. The endless battle of the nerds. Anyway, let's not get into that. Next up, I just wanted to highlight, because apparently this didn't hit your brain. DreamWorks had the rights to do a Fatal Frame movie. Can you let that sink in for a second, Carl?
DreamWorks had Fatal Frame.
Yes, DreamWorks, who has never made anything darker than The Prince of Egypt, which is not that dark of a portrayal of, the story and whatnot. Can you even begin to imagine what a DreamWorks Fatal Frame movie would have looked like?
I don't know. I'm willing to give DreamWorks... DreamWorks did Small Soldiers. Which has... Okay, let me explain to you how horrifying. I, to this day, still have nightmares about this, and I saw the movie when I was in college. It's a CG animated movie about these little toys, and an executive at this conglomerate decides that it would be a good idea to use the same chip in the toy that they use in smart missiles in another part of the company, which then creates these little psycho toy soldiers that decide to go to war. And when they need more soldiers, what they do is they take the chip out of one of the soldiers, turning him into a half lobotomized idiot, and break it into pieces and put little pieces into these Barbie dolls that they then also deform. And there's a scene where these Barbie dolls with deformed faces hold needles in their hand, and they're jumping on this little kid going, "We're going to give you a makeover." Believe me, DreamWorks could have made this thing as freaking freaky as you needed it to be. No, DreamWorks had all the options to make this terrible. Watch Small Soldiers and come back to me and tell me that is not a nightmare factory, because it's a nightmare factory. All right, I'm still traumatized.
But I'll just highlight the fact that the prior year they put out Shrek, and that should give you a sense.
Some people that was kind of a horror movie. Okay.
Nah, Shrek's fine. Shrek's okay. All right, then. Okay. Lastly, you're trying to over-explain English to your ESL friends. Legendary does have a secondary definition of someone who is just very, very well known, and their exploits are well known.
That's only if you're using the Urban Dictionary. Just kidding.
No.
Yeah.
No. Remarkable enough to be famous, very well known, says one dictionary, as a secondary definition for legendary.
Yeah. It's bastardization of a real word. And remember,
awesome was supposed to mean something that produced awe, but I'm pretty sure you've used that word in ways that it is not applicable in that sense. Language gets ahead of you, Carl. You cannot stop it. Sus is now in the dictionary. We must all suffer the consequences.
So is dough. So, yeah, I understand this, and I shall go to the battlements for the things that are right. Oh, and as far as horror movies and DreamWorks, they also did the remake of Fright Night, which was quite terrible. Although, whether or not that counts as real horror is another issue entirely. And as far as horrible things, they also did Cowboys and Aliens. Try to forget that you saw that movie.
Well, I didn't see that movie, so.
The best part is that I actually had business dealings with the company that produced that crap.
Beautiful.
Another story.
Okay,
oh, well.
Department of Corrections. I'll slide right on off of you. You can be on your merry way, Mr. Carl.
Ethan, as always, thank you for your service, and we'll see you back here next time for another Department of Corrections.
Okay, bye.
No, I haven't been here a couple of episodes, Carl, and you know what I've noticed?
What?
You're so off often so wrong on so many different levels.
No, I'm not that wrong. Come on, it's not that bad.
I mean, there's still Wikipedia you can go to, so live during the show.
Yeah,
like
sometimes
honesty.
questions come up and you want to answer them, so a quick check of Wikipedia while you're recording is not necessarily going to get in the way, as long as you can find a good citation in there that is reliable for use in the show.
Fits your opinion.
Yeah.
However, what do you say to your students when they use Wikipedia as a source?
As a source?
Yeah.
I tell them to go back and rewrite it or I'll flunk them. No, just kidding. No, I don't. It's not an issue in my classes, fortunately.
Yeah, of course.
So, but yeah, Wikipedia should usually not be used as a source. That's why I said if you find a Wikipedia entry that has a good citation, that's fine. Find a Wikipedia entry that has no good citation, then please steer clear. And I try to do this. It's not always possible, but I try at least. Okay.
You've written those articles on Wikipedia yourself, so
I've never actually written a Wikipedia article. No, I haven't gone down that rabbit hole. That's just too dangerous. Because I'd probably get obsessive about trying to fix stuff and then get into flame wars with people fixing my fixes. No, don't need to do that. Okay, let's move on then. Let's turn on the time machine and head back to September of 2002.
Guy's the one.
2002.
Demographic
Welcome back to December of 2002. Peter, what's our first story?
Playmore keeps Neo Geo alive.
Playmore, a company founded by Aikachi Kawasaki, probably killed that, the founder of SNK, in anticipation of SNK's bankruptcy back in 2001, will be keeping the Neo Geo brand alive. Playmore will ultimately acquire all of SNK's IP, rebrand itself SNK Playmore, before becoming just SNK in 2016.
Well, first of all, we should have made it a drinking game, like every time you've mentioned SNK, you should take a sip. Secondly, I'm looking forward to Ethan's correction of you butchering Aikachi Kawasaki and me butchering this as well.
I think I got it fairly accurate. I think I got that one somewhat okay, but yeah, I probably screwed it up someplace. But the important thing here is that the Neo Geo brand, the hardware, the games, the home versions will continue on, in some form or fashion until today. And it's all thanks to the fact that despite the financial problems of SNK, they're just going to keep it going. And the arcades, it's perfect hardware for the arcade even to this day. If you're going to do 2D, you just need a couple of fighters on the screen, or you need a whole bunch of stuff shooting at you in a Metal Slug game. That Neo Geo hardware, even though at this point in time is already 10 years old, is just a workhorse that's going to keep going and going and going.
But from a business point of view, let me repeat what I understood. So Aikachi Kawasaki, he's the founder of SNK, and he was damn sure his company will go broke, so he founded another company, Playmore, and with that company he bought the about to be broke company SNK.
He bought the assets. The company disappeared, but he bought the assets that included the trademarks. And so this is why once the other company is wrapped up, he can then change the name of his new company back into SNK. And this happens all the time with corporations.
It's just a little bit confusing. So why do you want to keep the SNK name when SNK there surely was a reason why SNK went broke.
Well, SNK goes broke for a variety of reasons. One of them is this collapse of the arcade business.
Yeah.
It's also his next generation, not second generation, because SNK goes all the way back in the arcades to at least the early 80s. And I think even before that, but I'm not going to put my hand in the fire for that one. But they tried to do a follow-up system to the cartridge-based Neo Geo, the Neo Geo CD, that failed. Then they tried to do a 3D hardware platform that also failed. Mm-hmm. So those were some of the bad choices that they made that ended up killing the company. But that original Neo Geo hardware and the games on it still had huge cachet. I mean, they're still making mini versions of the SNK hardware. You know, you can buy the little tabletop mini arcade and stuff like this. They're still selling the games on Steam and other platforms. So there was still value in SNK as a name. It's just a couple of bad hardware platform attempts and you're out. I mean, that's the company was big enough to make an impact, but never so big that it could really survive those kind of hits.
Okay.
Yeah. But moving on to other arcade news.
Yes. Hackers are making old ROMs new.
This month's PC Zone magazine features some efforts to make classic games look better without having to reprogram them. Using the wonders of emulation, MUDX is a project dedicated to creating brand new assets and overlaying them on existing games using emulated code to keep the classic gameplay intact. Games such as Galaxian, Pac-Man, Frogger, and Donkey Kong have already gotten the update treatment. For those looking for some quicker fixes, Turaco, the ultimately radical arcade-changing operator, that's the acronym, is a tool that rips sprites out of ROMs and allows users to do a pixel-by-pixel edit of the same.
So it's basically a remaster.
It's what we would nowadays call a remaster of an old game, yeah. And it's interesting that this is going on. I mean, the MUDX stuff, and there's links, like always, everything we talk about, there's links in the show notes, but you can still actually go to the archived version of the MUDX website. Yeah. The graphics that they're adding in have not aged well. They are these, amateurish, pre-rendered 3D graphics that were all the rage at this period of time when everybody suddenly had a bootleg copy of 3D Studio Max or something, and they just look absolutely terrible. But, it's this idea that the pixel-based art is just so passé at this point. We haven't really come around where everybody's like, oh, it's got to look pixely. That there is this movement online that we need to somehow get away from the pixel look. That we just don't want the pixel look. And they'll go with these terrible pre-rendered images instead of the nice, clean, original pixel look. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's going to change. The pixel aesthetic will really, really recapture people's imagination, but we're still a couple years away from that really taking off in a big way. And there's another story later on in this episode where we're going to see one of the big drivers for that return to the pixel look.
Mm. I mean, on the one hand, it's really interesting that nowadays where you can easily say goodbye to the pixel look, people are actually digging the pixel look again.
It's a wonderful aesthetic in and of itself, and even though it can't do everything, it has a charm that just endures.
It's so retro. But did I get this right? MUDX, this project, they handcrafted new assets for each game.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
So what they would do is basically create a new high-res, so higher resolution than the original game, high-res sprite sheet. And this emulator interface would still be running the emulator code. So the timing and everything would still be the same. as the original game, but now you would get this overlay with the new sprites on top of it.
Oh Lord, why the heck didn't they just upscale this stuff? But
well, if you upscaled it, it wouldn't really do anything. And also the idea of doing filters like we have nowadays to sort of emulate the CRT screen and stuff. Yeah. We're still not talking the resolutions. We're not talking 4K screens like we have nowadays. Yeah. In 2002, you're probably still running 1024 by 768 on your screen. So if you added a filter like that, you wouldn't really get a satisfactory effect.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to upgrade the graphics of these older games, this is kind of your only option.
Yeah, I'm just still wondering why should you upgrade the graphics on those other games?
Well, it's not that you should. It's more an issue of you can.
Yeah, of course.
And it's also something that is coming out of this idea that through websites and online communities, you can pool resources that an individual might not have had available to them.
And here we go with the mod community.
Exactly. It's the mod community hitting the arcade games. So, but let's leave the arcades behind. It's time to go console.
Yeah. First news. Peter recently was able to acquire a PlayStation 5. Just...
I don't believe that happened 20 years ago. I think you're destroying the illusion of that this is a time travel and that we are actually in the year 2002.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Although it felt like I've waited 20 years. Anyway, speaking of console wars, Xbox sales boom.
After its massive price drop, Microsoft's Xbox has seen its sales grow by 131% in the 2 months since the price cut. Maybe Xbox is still in the game after all.
Well, 131% sounds like a fairly large number. However, I would really be interested in what the absolute number is.
Well, I don't have the absolute numbers for these 2 months. It's obviously a huge improvement, but considering how far behind they were, it's not great. And one issue of note this month is that Sony has announced that they are about to break the 10 million unit sold mark on the PlayStation 2.
Yeah.
So
we are still talking the original Xbox here, aren't we?
Original, the big, huge black box, yeah.
With the Duke.
The Duke, but almost immediately. It's the Duke is being replaced very quickly with the inferior controller. I'm still a proponent of the Duke, but
you with your hands like.
I have big hands. What can I say? You interpret that any which way you want. But the Duke, that was such a comfortable feeling joypad. So nice. Okay.
I would so like to see you use Nintendo Switch controllers.
We've had this conversation. No. Oh my God. That thing is just a joke.
Speaking of Nintendo.
Hi, Ethan. I know you're loving this. Okay.
Speaking of Nintendo, Mario Sunshine has a slow start in Japan.
The traditionally long lines in Akihabara were absent on the day of Mario Sunshine's launch. The GameCube title sold 240,000 units on day one of its 400,000 shipped inventory, but still it appears that the game didn't have the same draw of previous titles. It may not have helped that the voice acting in the game was in English instead of Japanese.
Yeah, being someone from Japan, I would have been insulted as well. I mean, you can't follow the plot in Mario without proper...
Yeah, this is one of those very weird ones. Edge magazine out of the UK made this point about the dub, and I had never even heard about this, that they didn't use a Japanese language dub, but for whatever reason they decided to just do the English version. Also, the game is not really... a lot of aspects of the game aren't traditional Mario gameplay. And also, the install base of the GameCube is not as big as one might have hoped at this point.
Well,
so
there's
yeah,
just too many consoles on the market.
Well, I mean, in Japan, the Xbox is really a non-starter, non-issue.
Yeah.
It's because it's selling really so terribly. But the PlayStation 2 is just such a juggernaut at this point that Nintendo is going to have a very hard time. And ultimately, like we just heard in the Department of Corrections, the GameCube is going to sell less units than the original Xbox.
Yeah.
And it's going to be on the market considerably longer. So, yeah, it's not Nintendo's finest hour.
No, GameCube with its weird little discs.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Driver 3 to come to GameCube.
UK developer Reflections has announced that the plan to port their upcoming open-world gangster epic Driver 3, or Drive 3er, to Nintendo's GameCube is on. This is big news as the Cube is suffering from a lack of third-party support, and the massive success that is GTA 3 is leaving a lot of Nintendo fanboys salivating for a PS2.
So why was there actually never a port of GTA 3 coming to the GameCube?
I don't know I don't know if it was technical issues. It never does show up. And it's probably technical issues, maybe install base, who knows. It could just be the fact that Driver 3 was such a broken mess when it launched on the PS2 and never quite worked 100%. The PC port is also legendary for bugs that they just decided to cut their losses.
Yeah.
So yeah, the GameCube is really going to be hurting for some proper adult content. I mean, at least from the third parties. I mean, there will be games. There is going to be some violent content on the GameCube, but it's not going to be appealing to the same demographic with its software library than that the PS2 and the Xbox does.
By the way, did the GameCube have any online services, online multiplayer?
It does.
Stuff?
It does. We've talked about that over the last few months. Nintendo does launch a very limited online support, but there's only like maybe 4 or 5 games. It's a pathetically small amount of games, and it never really gets out of Japan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of online services, let's talk about the duel of the online services.
Both PS2 and Xbox Online services will go live this fall. While the PS2 network adapter will only cost $40 and includes both a standard modem and a network jack, it does not have a dedicated service to back it up. The Xbox Live Starter Package will cost $50 and include a headset for voice chat and 1 year of access to their online service. Since the Xbox already has a network jack, only existing high-speed connections will be supported.
Yeah, back in the day for $50 you also got a headset. Now I just get access to Xbox Live.
Well, and this was one of those things where the entire idea of having a headset to play games online, even on PC, was almost unheard of because, well, it was very forward-thinking to think that people would have a fast enough internet connection to pull this off.
Right.
And on the PC, you kind of needed an even faster connection than on Xbox for it, because you're coordinating different software packages. There's no real all-in-one solution for the online audio plus the online game and all this stuff. There's no real coordination, but Xbox Live is bringing it all together, so they have a single architecture, making it a much more efficient system than what most people are going to be able to experience on the PC.
Yeah. I'm just thinking back to Germany in 2002. I think, oh well, you're smiling. I think the proper online connection or the proper online speed just wasn't invented.
You were really, really lucky if you had an ISDN line, and that was maybe 128K
Bro, yeah, exactly.
a
because
second.
we had dual channel ISDN. However, we had to pay double the phone cost for that, so I wasn't allowed to switch that on.
That was pathetically sad and bad. And there was no point to it. In the States in 2002, I was in law school. I think I already had 2, maybe 4 megabit per second connection. I mean, it was, there was no comparison. Absolutely none. No. Now, there were other European countries that were much better off. But yeah, Germany was just... Germany had the problem that there was no competition from the cable companies. The cable companies really were the game changer in the US, too.
This is not the reason. It is entirely not the reason. The real reason is we like to talk to people face to face.
Oh, please, get off of it. This was the only reason why pay TV porn was still a good business model in Germany for so long.
Oh, it was?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a huge sector of the media landscape in Germany all the way through the end of the 2000s, up until about 2010. Even today, I mean, it's still a relatively large segment.
It is?
Yeah, they still make money off of it. I mean, it's not nearly what it once was.
Good for them.
But in like 2005, 2006, it was a huge moneymaker because people just did not have the internet connections necessary for streaming moving video. It was just not part of it wasn't part of the landscape yet, and that really was one of the big motivators for streaming video in the US, for example. As one always knows, anything media related will move faster if there's porn on it. So
it was like Rule 54 or something.
Don't ask. Yeah. So, anyway, let's move on.
Let's move on back to the console business. We're switching from porn to Sony, Sony that goes after mod chips.
A series of cases in the USA and Canada have highlighted Sony's intent to stamp out mod chip sellers and producers. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act in the USA, which makes copy protection circumvention a crime, is one of the main tools in this approach.
Okay. Just give me a little quick summary. So what were those chips doing?
Okay, a mod chip is a computer chip that you install in your machine. Usually it requires some soldering. So you actually are creating a physical connection between this chip and the console's motherboard, which then replaces existing chips, like, for example, the chip that checks to see if the DVD you put in your PlayStation is a legitimate DVD or the right region, or that checks to see if you're using a pirated copy of a game or a real game. And what the mod chip does is it's replacing or bypassing those protections so that you can run the pirated software.
Okay, so you basically opened your console and you soldered another chip to the motherboard.
Basically, yeah. Now, I can't remember if the PlayStation 2 ever gets a non-soldered option. I mean, some of these things get so sophisticated that you don't even have to solder anything in. Yeah. That you can just add it in, or you do it through software, like on the Xbox. But it's right now these are soldered in solutions, which makes it a little bit easier to go after the pirates because the average person is not going to be doing it themselves. They have to take it into a shop or send it into a company to be modified, and this makes it a lot easier for them to target a centralized source doing the work.
Were there so many of those shops doing the soldering? Because as you said, I mean, I would have been able to solder some chips to the motherboard, or even if I would have never been willing to because the PlayStation 2 wasn't that cheap.
Yeah, and it was not a cheap mod. I mean, people were paying serious cash to get these modded. And there were quite a few companies doing this. I mean, there's ads in backs of some of the magazines where, they're advertising these mods.
Oh,
so
it was allowed before this Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Well, that's the thing. It wasn't directly called out as a crime because you have the issue of you're modifying a piece of hardware that you purchased.
Yeah.
It would be like, the Ford Motor Company coming after you because you put racing stripes on a car that you bought from them. But, and this is where these mod chips lived in this weird gray zone.
Yeah, I mean, the chip isn't illegal, but as well as the stripes you put on your car. But if I put some nitro in my gas tank, well, not my gas tank, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
exactly.
I do something forbidden with that, then that is forbidden. So,
and this is where the language in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, making the copy protection circumvention, the intent of the modification, is what becomes a problem. Okay. And we see an interesting case here because we also have a report this month that a judge in Australia ruled against Sony, saying that the use of a mod chip for the intent of playing imported games is not illegal.
Ah, okay. So as long as you buy the game legally, you can use it. So soldering, for instance, a chip that makes it possible to have a 3D image in your living room, this would have been legal, but one that makes circumventing copyright protection is illegal.
And my understanding from the articles that I read, that this judge in Australia is making the argument that as long as you intend on playing stuff that you legitimately paid real money for, that you're not pirating. If your intent is not to pirate, then why should that be a crime? Yeah. You just wanted to play a game that they decided not to bring to Australia. Well, that's... that would be like, ooh, I bought a DVD of a Japanese movie while I was in Japan and I'm watching it in the States. Why should that be a crime? Yeah. And this is where that would be the idea of the gray imports and the fact that the gray imports have been made technically impossible to play. Well, if you find a way around it, what's the harm? Yeah. Is their idea. Exactly. So, and this is where we get into, this question of the intent that is laid out in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is not really, as I haven't found any cases in U.S. law where people have truly made that argument. I think it basically just always wins out that, hey, if you can use this to make pirated copies, you're done. But like with the arcade games, that we talked about we've been talking about in our 30-year jumps, where they're basically bringing in the boards, legitimately purchased boards from the East, and a lot of the other copying issues that have come before that. This is just the latest variation of the question, what can you do to prevent copying without, somehow locking down everything. And this is really where the idea that you don't actually own the software, you just license the software, also plays a big role. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
It gets complicated, and they're going to just keep basically finding ways to cut it all down. And then when they go to digital distribution, it kind of all disappears anyway. So.
Yeah, of course. And it doesn't matter anymore.
The digital distribution is going to actually kill off a lot of this intent, if you will, just for the simple fact that, once it's out there, who cares? But right now, when you have to, produce different versions of the content and, go through different physical distribution channels, there's contracts involved and everything else. So there's a lot more at stake with international distribution when you have to do physical goods.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. What about moving on? Because I have the feeling we have so much to talk about today.
Yeah, we need to be picking up the pace, I think, a little bit. So, handhelds.
Handheld. 3D gaming is the future, even on mobile.
Edge magazine talks to ARM, the makers of the RISC processors in most handheld devices, about the 6-year-long path from design to product of the GBA. That's the Game Boy Advance. Granted that launch was apparent. I'm just explaining it just in case.
Yeah, thanks for spoon feeding.
You're welcome. Granted that launch was apparently delayed to allow the Pokemon craze to run its course, but since there's always a minimum of 5 years from design to product, ARM has a good inkling of what is to come, and they say that the phone companies see 3D games as a big driver of 3G technology, and that they are targeting DirectX 7 or 8 level features using the Superscape i3D engine, which can massively reduce the size of the files needed for game software.
And what was the result of that? Massive success of Candy Crush.
Well, they give one example, which is they reduced the normal Quake for Pocket PC. Pocket PC was another operating system at the time.
Yeah. From
9 megabytes all the way down to 50K. So they were able to implement the game. Well, it's because if you have these built-in commands in the game engine, and you're making it more and more efficient, and you're making hardware that can actually do the 3D stuff as opposed to having to do it through software. And if you guys want to know more about this, on Patreon very soon there'll be the interview with my interview with the creator of Direct 3D, where we talk about all of this fun stuff and what this all means. Great interview. So what there's really doing is reducing the need for code, because so much of the work that the code would normally have to do in software is being done by hardware. Basically what ARM is doing here is saying your mobile phone is going to have what at this point in time is still considered a 3D accelerator, a GPU, is going to be in your cell phone. And because they're already at this point working on the stuff that will be coming out in 5 years, that's 2007. And so they're basically already working on the iPhone and all those devices.
You know, I'm just wondering how were they able to reduce the textures, the bitmaps, down to 50K?
Well, you can do a lot. You can do a lot with compression. If you have enough CPU power to decompress on the fly, and you put everything into compression, especially if you're looking at, remember, we're not at the point where you have the super high-res mobile phone screens of today.
Yeah.
They're still looking at mobile phone screens similar to, your old Nokia flip phones, maybe a little bit larger.
Yeah.
So you don't need a lot in the way of textures for a first-person shooter like Quake. You really just need, a couple of 8x8 textures for almost everything. Hell, you could probably make a wall texture that looks like a rocky wall and just change the color values on it, and now suddenly it's the skin of a monster. And a lot of games did tricks like that.
Yeah, makes sense. Not bad, not bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's simple things like that, but it's building all the functionality of processing 3D into the hardware and just having like one command that activates it as opposed to an entire subroutine of the program having to do it in software. That's massive.
You want to talk about something weird?
Yeah, let's do weird.
Let's do weird. Nintendo Entertainment System classics come to the e-reader.
Nintendo's card reader for the Game Boy Advance, which has been touted for its ability to add characters and unlock functions in games, is about to get its ultimate function, the ability to play classic NES titles. The new NES e-cards will be sold in packs, the swiping of which through the reader will load classic NES games like Excite Bike, Donkey Kong Jr., and Balloon Fight onto the GBA.
And nowadays we're happy to be able to play Doom on a pregnancy test.
Yeah. So
yeah, explain it.
Have you ever... Okay, so... The card reader looked like you would expect a card reader to work.
Yeah.
And so you swipe a little card, and I can't remember if it was a purely visual, so it was just basically scanning a little barcode on the card, or if it actually had a magnetic strip, but I almost want to say it was the visual. This is one of those moments when looking up a quick article on the e-reader will answer this question that I really, really, really should have looked up ahead of time. And let's see, what was it doing? E-reader cards. Yeah, I don't. No, yeah, it's just a little visual strip. Looks like.
Is that a Wikipedia page?
Yeah, it's a dot code.
Glasses?
Yeah, you can see it in my glasses. So the data is encoded on the cards using dot code. Okay. So it's basically like a barcode, but with multiple layers, because it's dots. Think about it as a whole bunch of little QR codes next to one another.
Yeah, of course.
So you would do this, and it would have the codes, to add stuff to your games. Well, now you're going to buy this pack of multiple cards. Okay. And you're going to be reading these in one after the other to load the game into the memory of the system so you can play the game on your thing. And the best part is when you turn it off, you're going to have to, next time you reboot, you're going to have to reload it into the memory.
No.
Oh, yes. And these are just paper cards, so you can try to start calculating how many times you're going to run this before it's no longer readable.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that. Just for shits and giggles. Why didn't they use just a game cartridge and slapped on all of them NES games on this one cartridge?
Oh, no, because remember, the NES games are still made up of memory. Those dots can only represent so much memory. So each one of these packs of cards represents only one game.
Yeah.
So you have to swipe, I don't know how many cards were in a pack, but you might have to swipe 5, 6, 7, 8 cards before the one game is loaded.
And I want to repeat my question. Why didn't they just put it on a cartridge?
On a cartridge?
Yeah.
Well, because the idea here is that producing a pile of cardboard is a whole lot cheaper.
Yeah, okay.
And so this was basically like, hey, you want a whole bunch of cheap games for your GBA? Here it is. Buy a pack of cards. Remember, this is also the period of time when Pokemon cards are absolutely massive. So the idea of buying a pack of collectible cards is already in the air. It's already appealing to the same demographic. Well, sell the kids who are buying the Pokemon cards also a package of these, e-reader cards for their Game Boy Advance, and now they can play some old classic NES games in addition to playing Pokemon.
Alrighty, while we're talking about useless stuff, Kemco launches GBA MP3 player.
GBA, not GBA. You went all Danglish on me for a moment there.
Man,
yeah.
It came right out and strangled me a little bit. GBA MP3 player.
Want to take 16 minutes of your fattest, most low-quality MP3 tunes with you and your GBA? Well, Kemco makes it possible, at least in Japan. Their MP3 player plugs into the GBA's cartridge slot, requires one AA battery, and uses a compact flash card for storage.
Oh, Lord.
It allows for sound recording from any audio jack-enabled device, and, in proper Japanese fashion, has a voice assistant to help you improve your karaoke skills.
And again, I can almost think of the answer. Why? I mean, you have a let me rephrase it. You have a cartridge. You put it into your GBA. You have to add a battery for the cartridge. And then you also need a flash card for storage. What the heck was the cartridge for?
Because you basically have to have power to output the audio. You need to be generating the audio output, and that costs power.
Well, maybe it has to do with
it also has
MP3, but
but it has to do primarily with the audio output. Okay, and so this is basically.
This makes no sense.
Remember, the idea here is we're still in a world where most people at best have a flip phone. A lot of people still have black and white phones.
Yeah.
But suddenly you've got this device that you can put in your pocket that can do all these other things, that potentially has the power of playing digital music. I mean, we're going to get episodes of Nickelodeon cartoons on cartridge. You're going to be able to buy a cartridge that doesn't have a game on it. It just has like 30 minutes of low-grade video so you can watch an episode or two of some show. Watch some SpongeBob SquarePants on your Game Boy Advance. Because we're at this point where everybody feels it in the air. Computer technology, everything you can do on your computer at home, will be able to do with a device in your pocket. And until the iPhone hits, the closest thing we've got is the Game Boy Advance, and everybody's jumping on here trying to figure out, okay, how do we make this dream of the portable technology, computer technology, real? What is the platform for it? And the GBA looks like it's that platform. And obviously none of this is all dead ends. But it's people thinking about, what would I want to do? And we've talked already 2 years ago about the first MP3 players coming out. MP3 players are still a big deal at this point, but they're relatively expensive. Here, you're piggybacking on an existing tech. And, but it's really that dream of the computer, the all-purpose computer in your pocket that plays any media that people are trying desperately to grab. And it's interesting, I'm preparing, the next 40-year jump, the October 1982 stuff, and in one of the magazines there's an editorial by Isaac Asimov, the famous science fiction writer, and that's one of the things he's predicting. It's the idea of the network-enabled pocket computer that allows you to pull up any data anywhere you are at any time. And he's talking about this in 1982. And in 2002, it really felt that way at the time. We're on the cusp of we will have all of this in our pockets. We knew it was coming. We just didn't know what the shape of it was going to be yet.
And it brought us Candy Crush.
It brought us Candy Crush, but we're going to get to Candy Crush at some point in the near future.
Yeah, really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So, moving on.
Well, actually, we're going to be looking at what you might call the spiritual predecessor to it today in one of the later stories. But, okay, let's keep going. Let's leave handhelds behind and move to the PC.
Foreshadowing. Yes, let's move to the PC. And to... Already, you really picked that topic? Okay, let's go with it. Play yourself in The Sims.
Yeah, it's a fun phrase. Abacus, a company that specializes in Microsoft Flight Simulator add-ons, has released Face Factory, a program that lets you create an avatar for EA's The Sims that looks like you. By scanning in a front and side view image of yourself, you can create a photo-accurate sim. A steal at just $19.95.
Yeah. Did you ever want to put yourself in a pool and remove the ladder? There you go.
Yeah, killing yourself in The Sims. There's something you really want.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. And it's interesting that this gets announced because there's a bunch of other games being announced or already being reviewed this month because The Sims is beginning to really spawn a lot of imitators. There's a game called The Partners, which sets the action in a law firm.
Okay.
And I have to admit, I actually did try playing The Partners back then. It's absolutely terrible, terrible game. But as a law student at the time, it just seemed cool, and I wasted about 2 months of my life on The Sims, so it was definitely worth it to at least try it.
For some reason, there was no game ever that caught up with The Sims.
What do you mean, game error?
Game ever.
That caught up to The Sims?
Yeah.
I don't think so. At least not one of the box full price games.
Yeah. No.
What you would call a AAA title. I mean, obviously there's more players of a lot of free-to-play games. But as far as, you buy it in a box games, no, The Sims is still, I think, the number one. But yeah, so, but The Sims is just such a big phenomenon at this point. There's this whole cottage industry of people selling stuff for it.
Oh yeah.
And the first Sims is still pretty unlockable. They do a slightly better job of, trying to close the ecosystem so they can make more money off of add-ons with later iterations of the game. But the first one, you could still, go in, hack the files, change textures around and stuff pretty willy-nilly.
Yeah. I mean, the later games, they just got greeny. That was insane. Anyway.
Yeah, it got out there. So, oh well.
Yeah. Bad EA. Moving on. Double Vision.
Peter Booth has announced his homegrown contraption to make split-screen multiplayer games play full screen by stretching the images, alternating between screen halves each refresh, and using synchronized shuttering through LED glasses.
I listen to the words, however, they have no meaning to me.
Okay, yeah, this is a weird-ass contraption which only makes sense in a world where online gaming isn't really a thing yet for everybody. Mm-hmm. So this guy, and there's a link to the archived version of his website where he's promoting this. So the software, hardware solution he comes up with is, or the problem he's trying to solve, let's start with that, is you're playing a game at home, and let's say it's a racing game and it's split screen, or it's a first-person shooter with a split screen.
Okay.
And you don't like the fact that you're only looking at half of the screen, right? So what do? You install Double Vision. That's the name of it. And so the program takes the top half of the screen, stretches it down so it's the full screen. It can't up the resolution or anything, so you still have the same shitty resolution that you had in the top half. Then it takes the bottom half of the screen and stretches it up. So now you have two full images. And now let's say the odd refreshes is the top image. The even refreshes will be the bottom image. And then each of the two players have to put on these LED glasses. So these glasses that have the ability to superimpose images, and they will blank out the image you're not supposed to see. So they will blank black, then they will be clear again, allowing you to see the image you're supposed to see, then blank again, and while they're black, on screen, the other person will see their image. So you're both looking at the same TV screen, but you're seeing a completely different image because you're only seeing every other frame.
I mean, this sounds like a lot of headache. And actually, I'm interested to see that in action. Well, after we're done, I'm going to go straight to YouTube.
Yeah, you can go on the links. It's in the show notes.
Yeah.
The weird thing is that we just talked about this in a 40-year jump, and the arcade game Sub Rock 3D was doing exactly the same thing 40 years ago, but for a single screen, and they were creating a 3D effect by every other frame of the game was slightly shifted. Okay. So that, and you were looking at the game through these goggles that had a little rotating wheel in them. And the wheel would then basically a block one eye at a time. So half the time one eye would be exposed, the other half the other. So you would, and then it would synchronize that with the screen. So you would, each eye would get a slightly different version of the monitor so that it looked 3D. It's basically faking the 3D effect that way. It's, yeah. And it's a pointless activity. It's like, no, just don't. But, and as far as I can tell, this actually never goes on sale. I looked as far as I could as long as this website existed, but there's never any real ordering information. It's always, this is coming at some point. But there are pictures of the LED glasses and examples of what this would look like and blah, blah, blah.
So it's basically like you want to do couch co-op without even paying attention to whoever you're playing.
You wanted couch co-op without having to squint. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on because there's absolutely nothing I can say about that. Make games using websites.
In the growing field of indie games being released online, one of the more interesting concepts presented in this month's Edge magazine is Now Noah, a game built by 3 Dutch design students that is a 2D space shooter, but the levels are procedurally generated. The interesting thing is that the program uses user-given URLs, which the program loads, scans, and then processes to generate the levels.
This is quite interesting.
It is an interesting concept. I believe it's using Flash, so Adobe Flash, yeah. As the program, there's a link to this in the show notes. I couldn't get it to work, but there are screenshots. It looks, it's straight top-down shooter. It looks a little bit like what you would imagine Asteroids looks like, but the ship is now in this tunnel, and the tunnel is... the walls of the tunnel are determined by the content on the websites that you give it.
This is actually pretty interesting. I mean, it's a time of a lot of experimentation. Some using the online stuff, others use music because a new age musician launches an experimental game.
Oh yes, Mike Oldfield, a new age musician best known for a piece that appeared in the Exorcist soundtrack, is launching a new experimental game called Tres Lunas, or 3 Moons, to accompany his new album of the same name. The game will be made available for free online. And there's video of this on YouTube. Again, link in the show notes. It's basically you wander around this desert and there's these weird geometric objects and stuff at different places, and you walk up to them and interact with them. It's I didn't play it because I couldn't find an actual copy of it anyplace. But PC Zone magazine described it as, quote, a non-violent affair which can best be described as indulgent new age bollocks. And Oldfield himself said, quote, when I showed Activision this thing, they saw the dolphins and said, how do you kill them? End quote. It's an interesting idea, but what it is most interesting about it is the way that it's being distributed, namely as a free download. So this, is showing that you can do these promotional items. I mean, around this, or years before this already, there were little flash games on websites for movies and stuff like this. Famously, the Space Jam website or Escape from LA website had these horrible little mini games that you could play on the websites. Mm-hmm. But this idea of creating this, full downloadable 3D game that you just give away for free as a promotional tool is something that we're going to see more and more of as we go forward.
Okay. Speaking about going forward, let's move to the retail section.
Yeah, since we were talking about new ways of distributing software.
Yeah.
See, segue right there.
Okay, let's talk about the most efficient way of distributing software. Print on demand is coming to software.
With the growth of the games business, supply chain impasses are an increasingly large source of lost sales on hot products. To alleviate the dreaded out-of-stock problem at retail, a variety of companies are trying to develop on-demand services for the printing of software in stores. One such company, Tribeca Limited, has launched kiosks that will burn CDs and print manuals on demand, on site at retail, avoiding the pesky problem of a game not being in stock. Others, like Tornado Virtue, are creating an internet backbone that publishers can use to allow digital download sales of games from their respective websites.
Oh Lord, honestly, I don't want to dive too deep into that because then we'll talk about this tomorrow. Speaking about the rights management here and whatnot.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering. This didn't really pick up, did it?
No. The on-site kiosk idea doesn't take off. For the simple reason that I can imagine it probably burnt like 5 CDs before it broke. We're also running into the problem that more and more companies are moving to DVD at this point, which is also making the whole thing more complex and more difficult and more prone to error. Plus, I mean, what happens if you have this, burnt CD? It doesn't work when you get home because this is still an era when, burnt DVDs and CDs were very prone to not working with individual people's machines. It's just so open to problems that it's not even... I don't see how they can solve all the issues.
Okay.
And Tornado Virtue, I don't know how long they stay in business and how much they're doing it, but the idea of the individual websites setting up their own stores is going to be a thing for a while for digital downloads. There's going to be a lot of smaller publishers or indie producers who are going to sell through digital downloads. We've talked about a few examples of those over the last few months here. But the big juggernaut of the industry is already out there. We talked about how Steam started a couple months ago. And so distribution paths are changing. The way people get the games that they play is changing. And again, it's just one of those moments in time when everybody knows something's happening, but there's a billion different options that you can put your money on, and nobody has a crystal ball telling them exactly who's going to end up winning at the end.
Right. So people are just experimenting with stuff, such as Sean Baby, who puts Blockbuster's flat fee rental scheme to the test.
Blockbuster Video, the mega video rental store chain in North America, has introduced a flat fee program that allows users to rent as many movies or games as they want each month for just $20, as long as they don't have more than 2 titles out at a time. Electronic Gaming Monthly has tasked stand-up comedian and internet pop culture critic extraordinaire Sean Baby with playing games from Blockbuster all month. The slow creeping insanity is hilarious. And again, there's a direct link to this article. It's a couple pages long. I highly recommend it. I've been a fan of Sean Baby's stuff since forever, since the 90s. He's absolutely awesome. If you guys don't know him, he's the one who popularized the idea that Aquaman is useless. And this stuff is just really, really funny as he's going through and is like, well, they said I could get any game I wanted, but then again, all the good games were gone, and so he starts playing, Kate and Ashley games and all sorts of weird shit. It's very, very funny. But here we see again, the video rental stores see more and more competition. This idea of the flat fee
Yeah.
Because we've already talked about Netflix is already out there. There's going to be a couple of services that are going to try to do games in a Netflix model. And Netflix at this point is not streaming. It's just, DVDs by mail. But, how does the physical Blockbuster store compete against you pay a fee every month and you just get as many movies as you want? This is their attempt to do this. And going back to our wonderful chat about the GameCube controller, my favorite line in his piece was describing the GameCube controller as, quote, I don't know what... I don't know what kind of moon octopus hand that damn controller was designed for, but the button setup looks like a robot threw up on a boomerang.
Oh, yeah. True story.
It's poetry. It's accuracy and poetry. And it's, yes. Oh, well. Okay.
All right.
Moving on.
Let's move on to some more serious topics. Gabe Newell wants Steam to spur innovation.
In a column in this month's Games Developer magazine, Gabe Newell of Valve is cited as saying that he hopes that Steam will open up game development to more types of developers through reduced piracy, increasing the possibility of being successful in the market, more flexibility in the types of games that can be developed, and new ways to provide content.
Oh well, I mean, Steam was so successful, and I think there are many, many games being developed just for Steam. Most of those games are actually pretty useless, but there might be some gems in between.
Well, yeah, but there's a lot of games on there that very successful games that would have never been made or never gotten released to a mass audience without Steam as a platform.
This is true.
I mean, things like Stardew Valley or any number of small indie titles.
Exactly. Never without Steam. True that.
No. It would have never made sense without a platform like Steam.
Yeah, and this online distribution platform is it's just gold for small and new developers.
Yeah. I mean, anything that would be too small for a premium priced boxed game, where it wouldn't justify the real estate at retail, suddenly was an option, and it changes everything about game development in a fundamental way. So it's very prescient here. I mean, at this point, Steam is really just the thing you have to install to play Counter-Strike or Half-Life. But it's going to take a couple years before his real vision for it comes out. But I thought it was such a striking vision, and one that does become reality pretty much the way that he describes it, that it was worth mentioning here.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Speaking about online, let's do some online gaming.
Yep, MindArk raided.
MindArk, or Mindark, no idea how to pronounce it. The Swedish game developer behind MMO Project Entropia had its offices raided by police who were checking to see if they were using pirated software. The raid found nothing, and the developers accused Microsoft of going after them as their game, which later would be retitled Entropia Universe, was positioned as a competitor to Microsoft's Asheron's Call 2.
So, was it actually well, actually, I've never heard either of Asheron's Call 2 or of Entropia Universe. So, what is it?
Well, and the raid itself is less interesting because I had never heard of Entropia either. But so Asheron's Call was the sequel to the first Asheron's Call, both MMOs by Microsoft. They came and went. They had a big following for a while, but they're no longer running. Okay. Now, Entropia, on the other hand, is still running. And its innovative thing is that it has a real world money system.
Okay.
So you didn't have to pay anything to get started. You could start playing the game with zero. You basically ended up like a naked guy standing in the middle of a field or whatever. Mm-hmm. But anytime you wanted to do something in the game, you had to buy resources. Mm-hmm. And that those resources were bought with a currency that had a fixed exchange rate with the dollar.
Oh, okay.
So you wanted a hammer, it was going to cost you so much of the in-game currency, and that equaled so many dollars. And you could buy and sell properties that you developed in this fantasy game world, and they've racked up things like $50,000, physical dollars, real dollars, for the sale of a property and stuff. It's absolutely insane, and this thing is still going. And the more I read up on it, I mean, it's probably not the first free-to-play game in that sense, but it feels very much. It feels very, very much like the prototype, or at least the proof of concept, the real successful proof of concept of the free-to-play model.
Oh yeah.
And like I said, it's still going. Their website currently talks about how they're finally doing a major overhaul of the graphic engine to the latest version of the Unreal Engine or whatnot. But that's not really the point here. The point here is the game is still running. People are still putting money into it. And the developer that nobody's heard about is still running 20 years later.
This is insane.
Yeah. So yeah, and when I saw this notice, I was like, I've never heard of these people. I thought maybe it's just one of those little MMOs that popped up. There's dozens of MMOs running at this point, and I barely mention them here in the show because so many of them come and go so quickly. There's few that really make an impact, but this kind of caught my attention. I went down a whole rabbit hole on it for a while.
Okay. So. Well, let's not do that. Instead, let's just move on.
Yeah.
Because this is insane, and I think it's still running because people invested so much money in it that they don't want to quit, because if you bought a property for $50,000...
Or maybe it's just a fun game. I mean, some people just like this. And also there's a concept in the free-to-play world known as whales. Mm-hmm. So you run the free-to-play for tens of thousands, if not millions of people who don't pay anything or barely pay anything.
Yeah.
But then you run it because you get the whales. These people who will drop hundreds, thousands or more on these games. And they basically cover the cost for everybody else, plus some. And so, that's all you need is a couple of good whales. And who knows, it's probably also a great way to launder cash.
Yeah.
You know, have a whole bunch of money, have one person put the money in the game, another character gets the items, sells the items, and then suddenly takes the money out of the system. And
can you take the money out of the system, though?
Yeah, you can take the money out of the system. You can cash out your coins at any time.
Who gives you the money?
What?
Where do you get the money from?
Well, okay. It's just like in the real world. So you put some money in, and you use that money to buy the hammer. Money is no longer in your account. Right. And when you go to sell the hammer, it's a used hammer because all the items wear down over time.
Of course.
It's not worth as much. And so now the company has made, even if you sell the hammer, you're not going to get the same price for the used hammer as you paid for the new hammer. So that means that the difference between those two is what the company gets to keep.
Yeah, but the hammer, I thought obviously you can sell it to other players. At least I think so.
Yeah.
But then you can also sell it to the bank.
You might be able to. I don't know exactly the details of the economy, but you can sell items, and whatever money is in your account can be traded out again for real currency.
Okay, so you can cash out and then they pay you. Okay, interesting. Still moving on. Meridian 59 Resurrection advertised.
In a weird curio, Meridian 59 Resurrection, a relaunch of Meridian 59 for the German market, appears in this month's PC Games magazine. The game is part of a relaunch spurred on by Near Death Games, a studio that has bought the rights to the old 3DO MMO and is bringing it back.
Huh.
Okay, so Meridian 59, for those not in the know, is, if not the first, one of the first 3D open world MMOs. Mm-hmm. So this is way back around 95, 96, somewhere in that area. So very early modem game, using essentially an engine that looks very Doom-ish. The characters are not 3D models, they're flat, icons, but you're moving around a open 3D world in an MMO setting, a fantasy game. And this was launched by the 3DO company, and while the 3DO company is no more, did 3DO already go under at this point? I can't remember. I know we talked about it, but now I'm blanking at this point. It's nearly midnight. So, but the Meridian 59 game had been shut down for a while. It's been brought back now by this new company, and it was just weird that they're advertising that there's a German company representing it. They gave it a brand new name, and they're trying to get people to sign up and play this game. So Meridian 59 is coming back, and it's still running to this day. You can jump on and play Meridian 59, and I think it's even listed on Steam, so there you go. Yeah.
Not bad. When Germans do something, they do it in order to last. Speaking about Germans and things that definitely did not last, at least not where they used to be, Games Convention comes to Leipzig.
With no real big industry event prospering in Europe, the first ever Games Convention, great name, took place in Leipzig, Germany from August 29th to September 1st. The event would be open to the public and see luminaries such as Warren Spector and Bruce Shelley make appearances. The event would stay in Leipzig until 2008, when it would be replaced by the Gamescom show in Köln, or Cologne, if you will.
We might build things that last. We are not good at marketing and finding good names. And it's a games convention. Why do we want to give it another name?
Well, since they're using the English words, it suddenly distinguishes it. Yeah. It's the whole chai tea joke. Chai is just a word for tea, so TT.
TT.
Yeah. No, so, and I was actually at one or two of the games conventions, 2004 and then later on 2005. I remember playing Doom 3 for the first time at the games convention back when I was still in Leipzig and I was living there. So it was a pretty good convention. It's very big at the convention center in Leipzig. But unfortunately, Leipzig before World War II was the convention city in Germany.
Yeah.
But then after World War II, with the separation East and West Germany, Leipzig became part of East Germany. It remained the convention center for East Germany. A lot of Soviet bloc stuff happened there. But the West German conventions moved to Cologne, and after reunification, Leipzig basically saw most major conventions stay in Cologne instead of, sort of splitting between the two. Leipzig has a very nice big convention hall, but it is very rarely taken full advantage of because all the major conventions are in Cologne. And this was a time period when they were really trying to start up new conventions, fill holes in the market, like, for example, a video games expo. And as soon as something started going well, Cologne basically poached it away, which is exactly what happened here. So, oh well. That is the beginning of Games Con or Games Convention. So, what else we got going on in the weird?
In the weird, 8-bit theater gets highlighted in EGM.
Webcomic classic 8-Bit Theater, which popularized the sprite-based comic, gets a write-up in this month's EGM, or Electronic Games Monthly. Have you ever heard of 8-Bit Theater?
Well, of course I haven't.
Oh, okay. Well, 8-Bit Theater was this webcomic, and webcomics were huge at this time. I was even doing webcomics at this time.
You were doing that, yeah. I wanted to
Yeah. So this was a webcomic that was made using primarily sprites from the original Final Fantasy game on the NES. So you had the wizard and the priest and all this, and it started out sort of as a funny take on Final Fantasy, and the story runs for many, many years.
Okay.
And it really popularized this idea that, the comic didn't have to be hand-drawn. It can just basically be done with, a guy copying and pasting these sprites back and forth and putting speech bubbles above them. And like I said earlier, the idea of seeing the sprite art as an art form, as, cool. 8-Bit Theater is one of these forms of media that really embraces the sprite. In this case, and the guy openly admits it, it's like, I didn't know how to draw, so this was the best way, this was the only way I was going to be able to pull this off. But it really, really popularized sprite art. And it also it helped that we started getting a bunch of websites and people posting sprite sheets. So they would just rip all the sprites out of a game, put it into one big image file, and post it online. So suddenly the resources to do this kind of work were also being made available. And like I said, 8-Bit Theater is one of the granddaddies, one of the founding pillars of the webcomic movement, together with things like Penny Arcade and PvP and Sinfest and so many others. And it runs for a very long time, has a massive following, and the author then goes on to do a bunch of other things like Atomic Robo and so forth. So very, very cool to see this run. The comic actually started in 2001, and it will end in 2010. So it's a 9-year run. Pretty good.
Interesting. However, I want to move on and talk about something that... let's not say that you are doing with all of us here. Academia gets lectured on games.
This year's Games Developers Conference Europe will feature a day focused on teaching academics about games. The proliferation of game-related degrees and courses at universities has made the move all the more important, as many of the courses being offered at institutions of higher learning are just renamed media courses with instructors who know little to nothing about video games.
Well, as long as they can talk about that, why not?
Well, and this is the thing, it's because the demand by students to get into the video game industry is so great that they're just taking standard media classes like film classes and stuff and slapping a couple of classes theoretically about video games on top. And the article that I'm referencing here from Edge Magazine, they've got these great quotes, about game developers talking to these academics, and the academics are like, oh yes, the greatest game design ever was Myst. And it's, it's like, oh crap in a hat. These people actually know nothing about programming, know nothing about gameplay, and have literally played virtually zero games, or suddenly teaching courses on this, or they think they can get caught up on a weekend, and it's not going to help any of the students. The students are going to be none the wiser when they come out of these programs.
Well, not only those programs. Moving on and talking about stuff that really help people. UK using Half-Life to train soldiers.
Last month, the U.S. Army announced the launch of their FPS training/recruitment tool, and this month news got out that the UK Army is using a modified version of Half-Life to train soldiers on new weapons and tactics. So,
did it work?
I don't know if it worked, but it has a lot of the feel of the old Battlezone, or the old arcade cabinets that were adapted from Battlezone to train people on how to use the Bradley fighting vehicle in the early 80s. So, it's this idea of use software to, practice and train complex group behaviors. I mean, modified version of Half-Life, for all we know, they could have just been playing Counter-Strike, but yeah.
All right.
But it is interesting to see, that these resources are versatile enough for all these different purposes.
Well, this is true. Okay, and moving on to the movie section, because we are also pretty versatile. W.S. Anderson to direct Alien vs. Predator.
While the property started out as a comic before becoming novels and then video games, hopes are high for the film debut of Alien vs. Predator, as W.S. Anderson also directed the original Mortal Kombat and Resident Evil films.
Oh, well, I have to admit, I've actually never seen any of them Alien movies, and also none of those Alien vs. Predator movies. So,
but you have at least seen Predator, right?
No, of course I haven't. It's really not my cup. I mean, sorry, but it's really not my cup of tea.
Oh, no, stop. Don't even say that. The original Predator is a film masterpiece.
I'm not saying it's bad.
No. When you say it's not your kind, you don't know what kind of movie it is.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, the original Predator must be seen. I'd also say Alien and Aliens, the sequel, also must be seen. Because they're just phenomenal films.
Ever since you said the exact same about Postal, I'm rather skeptical about that.
Oh, come on. Postal was brilliant for being so terrible. That's a different story. You can't compare that.
There was just one problem, man. We watched it with our...
significant others?
Yeah, I'm thinking...
I think Steffi was Steffi there?
Yeah, she
was there.
But you were single back then.
I was single back then. I did not make that mistake.
You were really frustrated, wanted us not to be happy anymore, and you were like, "This is the masterpiece. You have to see that movie." And we're like, "Okay, let's go for it."
Hey! In my defense, I made sure we had plenty of alcohol that night, so it softened the blow. It didn't feel like enough, but then again, there's no amount that could make that feel like enough.
My girlfriend is still telling me, whenever Cole says we have to watch that movie, no, you can go for it, just don't include me.
I've ruined all my future recommendations by recommending Postal.
Pretty much. I mean, just no advertisement is bad advertisement. So
not everybody can claim that they have had a lasting effect on the world.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Okay. So yeah, Alien vs. Predator, it's gonna suck. But in other movie news,
Spy Hunter to make the leap to the big screen.
80s arcade classic Spy Hunter is to get the big screen treatment, according to Variety, by way of Hobby Consolas. The Rock, a wrestler who made his big screen debut in The Mummy Returns, will be headlining the project.
Is it one of those movies that are really a must-watch?
It's a movie that may have been a must-watch had they actually made it.
Oh, okay.
And this one's interesting because Spy Hunter was basically just a top-down racing shooting game. There wasn't much to it, and this new version of Spy Hunter, and everybody's just calling him The Rock at this point because he's still basically just the wrestler. Dwayne Johnson, the name hasn't really popped up yet.
Yeah.
And this movie never gets made. It gets it keeps getting postponed. But what does get released is a video game using The Rock. So The Rock appears in the game, or at least on the cover artwork, and it is a 3D update to Spy Hunter. But the movie never gets made. So it's, by all, the press of it at the time was basically that the game was based on the concept designs and stuff that would have been the movie. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds rather pointless. Let's move on.
Well, I mean, you have to remember, at this point in time, one of the top movies in the last few months was Resident Evil. Before that, we got a Tomb Raider movie. Everybody's jumping on this bandwagon that we must make movies out of video games again.
Yeah, so, I mean, making movies out of video games is almost as successful as making video games out of movies.
That is actually a very astute observation.
Yes.
And House of the Dead is coming soon because it's already in production. They've already filmed it, and that's going to be a shit show. Oh well.
Anyway, and now let's go to the what I call Peter section: company downfalls. I like that.
Hit me.
Hit you. Vivendi may be looking to sell its games division.
Burdened by more than $18 billion with a B dollars in debt, French conglomerate Vivendi may be looking to unload its games division, which includes such big-name companies as Blizzard, Sierra, and Universal. Vivendi began life as a water utility before evolving into a media giant and is struggling to cope with its €30 billion debt and investigations by French stock market regulators.
Wait a second. $18 billion were €30 billion in debt?
Well, they have an $18 billion in debt.
Yeah.
And that's just an active debt that they can't pay. Their total debt burden is $30 billion. And I did a deep dive on this for like a couple of days and came out of it with a rough idea of where their financials are. But basically, they've got $18 billion of debt that they have to immediately deal with, and they're trying to also issue bonds around this time that nobody wants to buy.
Well, of course.
And it's a total debt burden of 30. But I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that they bought a bunch of companies and they don't really have the money. They were sort of supposed to make payments and stuff. It gets really complicated.
Okay. So were they able to sell their games division?
They will end up selling their games division, so all these companies, to Activision in 2006.
Okay.
So,
they are to Microsoft right now.
And now Microsoft is buying Activision. So yeah, so Blizzard is going to become part of Activision. The Sierra library is also, I think, going to go to Activision, but they don't really do much with it or nothing at all. Universal is going to be things like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. That also ends up then at Activision.
Oh yeah, it does.
Yeah. And it's because of this. This is how this deal ends up playing out. Now, other big players from the 90s are also facing hard times.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, and this is it. 3DO is fighting off NASDAQ delisting. So 3DO is still in the business. Meridian 59 is long gone, though. They've been selling off a lot of their properties in order to raise funds to stay afloat. But the stock price on 3DO has dropped so low that the NASDAQ wants to delist them.
Oh, okay.
And a combination of a reverse stock split and new loans backed personally by Trip Hawkins, founder of EA and founder of 3DO, is supposed to help them. And I had to look up what a reverse stock split is. So it's where they basically tell everybody who's got 2 shares, we'll give you just 1 share, and that'll double the value of that share. Mm-hmm. So Yeah, and that doesn't really help. And Midway, which lost half of its stock value in one day as it reported lower expected earnings due to several product delays and cancellations.
Oh good.
Yeah, so a lot of these guys, remember, we had a downturn between the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2 generations. And a lot of these companies were hit hard by that, especially the ones that were already struggling. 3DO hasn't really had a big hit game in a long time. Midway discovered it's a lot harder to do console games than they thought, especially with their skills in the arcade, and the arcade collapse has really hit them hard. Now, on the other side of this, EA gets bumped up from S&P Midcap 400, that's for lesser companies, to the S&P 500 proper. So just as Trip Hawkins' second company, 3DO, is about to leave the NASDAQ, his old company is now moved up to the S&P 500, which I believe they're still in to this day. So they've made the big time now. EA is going up.
Oh yeah, EA. Anyway, and now let's talk about some fun news. Appeal closes its doors.
Appeal, the Belgian company responsible for Outcast, the massive action-adventure game set in a voxel world, has not only announced the cancellation of Outcast 2, but also shuttered its doors. The financial failure of the original Outcast seems to have finally doomed the company. And yes, I know it's not an actual voxel engine, it's a height alteration thingamajig, but still, it kind of looks voxely, so I'm going with that. Okay.
And the last topic of today.
Yeah, so, sorry, just as a side note, Appeal, not a huge company.
No.
Outcast 2 is never going to come out, at least in this version of it. There will be a revival of the Outcast brand years and years later with a remastered version and some new games, but yeah, this version of Outcast 2 is unfortunately gone.
Yeah, too bad. Speaking of things that are gone, Cryo is no more.
French adventure game developer Cryo, which first started with Dune, but later degenerated into mindless nonsense games like Frank Herbert's Dune, has failed to renegotiate its debts and has filed for bankruptcy.
Anything else in the pipeline?
Oh, they had so many bad games. So a little bit of history about Cryo. Well, they also had Dune Generations, which was going to be their Dune MMO. That was in the pipeline. That's never going to see the light of day now.
Well, it will. Well, not that one.
Not this game will. Yeah. No. There is a Dune MMO coming, but it has nothing to do with this game.
Of course not.
That's 20 years later. But yeah, so Cryo has an interesting history because it's basically the core people of it started out at, I believe, Ubisoft. Then they had their own weird label where they were doing weird games like Captain Blood. And then after that, company collapsed. They were the ones doing all these weird press events, and we talked about it on one of our 30-year jumps last year. Yeah. And then they built Cryo. Cryo had a few good successes with their first game engine. Dune, KGB were two top titles. This fun, weird little adventure strategy hybrid engine. And by the end here, they're just making these terrible pre-rendered CGI games that are unplayable messes. They've got all these Dracula games and Frankenstein games or whatever. They're just really bad. The puzzles make no sense. They're just churning them out to have product on the shelf.
Yeah.
Frank Herbert's Dune. So the original game was just Dune. Then there's also Dune 2. Those were the two games being developed simultaneously. But then there's also Frank Herbert's Dune, which was a 3D exploration, action, adventure title they made where suddenly Paul Muad'Dib has this little furry anthropomorphic animal creature following around. It made no goddamn sense. I tried playing it for like 5 minutes. I was just like, no, screw this, and I was done.
The Dune license.
Yeah, they really did butcher the Dune license there. I have no idea. I've only seen a couple screenshots of what Dune Generations was supposed to be. No idea. Couldn't tell you what, if anything, that was supposed to become, but whatever the case may be, I mean, they were talking a big game about how, you would go over and it would become this big strategy thing, and you'd start out really small, and as you got more and more stuff, you'd be managing more and more stuff. Who knows? Whatever the case may be, it's dead, Cryo's gone, and we'll miss the few good games that they made.
2 good games. Okay.
Yeah. And that's the end. We've reached the end of the episode, which means you must now give us the word of the episode, Peter.
It's not just one word. I'll be back.
Is that a threat or a promise?
Well, we see.
Okay. So, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Remember, sign into the socials, leave a review. That helps people find us. If you want to tweet about it, if you like what we've been doing, post on your socials about the show. We really, really would appreciate to get to a wider audience. I think there's more people out there who are interested in these deep dives, especially as a chronological series. And of course, if you have any comments, send them to us by email. And if you can, troubled times ahead, I know, but if you can't support the show, drop us $1 over on Patreon. And Peter, as always, it's good to see you again.
Yeah.
It's been too long, and
way too long.
We will get you back again soon enough, I am sure. So, everybody, have fun.
Bye.
Cool.